Again this evening to the book of Ezekiel in chapter 4, and we should be able to conclude this chapter this evening. Last week we began to look at the last two verses, verses 16 and 17. Let's read them again this evening. He said, "Moreover, he said unto me, Son of man, behold, I will break the staff of bread in Jerusalem, and they shall eat bread by weight and with care. And they shall drink water by measure and with astonishment, that they may want bread and water, and be astonished one with another, and consume away for their iniquity." Those that were in Jerusalem and remained in Jerusalem at the time of this portrayal would suffer extreme misery. When you think about being so hungry that you're wasting away, you're pining away. And we'll read some more scriptures that paint that portrait this evening. But certainly would be a time of misery. And not only not having enough food to weigh, and the food that you did have having to weigh it out, but then you don't have enough water to drink as well. And as we said last week, when we get into the 5th chapter, we're going to see that there's many who die from that affliction, from that being shut up, from that famine that has been brought on by the opposing army at the hands of God. The city was shut up, the supplies were cut off, and the Lord said, "I will break the staff of bread in Jerusalem. I will." And we looked at that for a bit and saw that, it's the Lord. The Lord brings things to pass, and He can use any army, all the armies of the earth, to accomplish His purpose. They are His servant. Not only, we said, not only would there be the shortage of food, but it would also lose its power. I mean, the food, because it's the basis of food, doesn't have the nourishment there to sustain life and to give strength to the muscles and to the body that stand in need of. So, it's an anxious time. They're eating their bread and drinking their water with care, with anxiousness, not knowing whether there'll be another meal or how much longer they'll have food and water to drink. We took that thought and we tried to portray in closing last week that as an example to us, as long as we are serving the Lord, as long as we're seeking the Lord first, we don't have anything to worry about. In regards to, well, we don't have anything to worry about. The Lord's our trust. The Lord's our rock. In Him we trust. Whether it's food and water or clothing, or whether it's the onslaughts of wicked men. We don't have to worry. The Lord's in control. But just as Israel, just as Jerusalem is our example, is an example, these things were written for our ensamples. If we live a life in rebellion to the Lord, distrust, unbelief, disobedience to the Lord, as a child of God, disobedience to the Lord is unbelief. We have that example in Moses and Aaron. And they were not permitted to go into the land, promised land. Why? Well, because of their disobedience in striking the rock twice when he was supposed to have spoken to the rock. And the Lord says, because you did not believe me. We may or may not look at that passage of Scripture tonight in Deuteronomy chapter 32. He says those words to Moses. But that's where we left off last week, is trying to enforce in our minds that seek the Lord first. Trust Him. His righteousness. We don't have anything to worry about. We don't have anything to be anxious about and troubled about. Tonight, as we read verse 17, we see that they were to suffer great need. He said that they may want. I mean, think about that. He said that they may want. It sounds like the Lord wanted them to be in want, wanted them to lack, wanted them. Yeah, it's exactly right. I mean, that's not what He's wanted. Originally, He wanted them to be obedient. And He said, you obey and I'll bless you. And He says that to us today. Obey and I'll bless you. But because of their sin, because of their rebellion and their stiff-neckedness, hard-heartedness, God says, I'll put them in want. I'll put them in great need. And you're going to see, especially as we get into the 5th chapter, what all is entailed in that great need. And this was to be universal. And it was to be because of their sin, because of their iniquity. He closed out that 17th verse. He said, for their iniquity. Yes, Israel, Jerusalem. My mind's running together with my studies in the 5th chapter and now trying to close out the 4th chapter. I don't remember if it's in our closing thoughts tonight, but Jerusalem. Yeah, it's in the 5th chapter. Jerusalem, the beloved city of God. We have scriptures in the Psalms that his desire is to dwell in Jerusalem. He says, I will dwell in Jerusalem. Multitudes of these people, as we've already mentioned, would die from the famine. You think about dying from famine, dying from starvation, and a lack of water. That's a slow and an agonizing death. I mean, you literally waste away to nothing and end up finally dying of malnutrition. Because first of all, the fat, the body begins to attack the fat stored up for such cases. But when that's gone, then it begins attacking the muscles. And consider how many internal organs are muscle. The heart is the big one. It's a muscle. It's a death that is worse than by sword. You see, to die by a sword or by hanging or by beheading would be a quick death compared to one from a famine, from starvation. Turn with me to the book of Lamentations, in chapter 4. In verse 9, they that be slain with the sword are better than they that be slain with hunger. For those that are slain by hunger, pine away, they waste away, stricken through for want of the fruits of the flesh. Slow and agonizing death, but so it's better to die by the sword. Turn with me to the Psalms 109. In verse 24, David said it like this, and whether you think of him to talk of a spiritual famine, or whether you think of him talking of a physical famine, whether one that he had put upon himself, or don't recollect in Samuel or the Kings or the Chronicles of David being in a famine of such, so probably more of a spiritual, but this is the idea behind the famine. For I am, verse 24, my knees are weak through fasting, and my flesh faileth of fatness. In other words, he said he's wasting away. And whether it was as we said, a famine that he had imposed upon himself, I can't imagine a man imposing upon himself such a famine that would last so long that he would be getting to that point. That's getting detrimental to your life. But that's what happens when you're dying of hunger and thirst. You're literally wasting away. And be mindful of this, it was their sin, their iniquity, that brought this upon them. Look at a description of their suffering. Jeremiah paints for us a description of their suffering in Lamentations in the first chapter. And we'll begin reading with verse 1. He said, "How doth the city sit solitary, that was full of people? How is she become as a widow? She that was great among the nations, and princess among the provinces, how is she become tributary? She weepeth sore in the night, and her tears are on her cheeks. Among all her lovers she hath none to comfort her. All her friends have dealt treacherously with her. They are become her enemies. Judah is gone into captivity because of affliction, and because of great servitude. She dwelleth among the heathen. She findeth no rest. All her persecutors overtook her between the straits. The ways of Zion do mourn, because none come to the solemn feast. All her gates are desolate. Her priests sigh. Her virgins are afflicted, and she is in bitterness. Her adversaries are the chief. Her enemies prosper. For the Lord hath afflicted her, for the multitude of her transgressions. Her children are gone into captivity before the enemy." Do you see the wasting away? Do you see the pining away of Jerusalem? Verse 6. "And from the daughter of Zion all her beauty is departed. Her princes are become like harts that find no pasture, and they are gone without strength before the pursuer. Jerusalem remembered in the days of her affliction and of her miseries all her pleasant things that she had in the days of old, when her people fell into the hand of the enemy, and none did help her. None did help her. The adversary saw her and did mock at her Sabbath." Do you not know that they remembered the days of their dainties? The days when they had it so nice and so wonderful? Yes, when they're in this grief, when they're in this torment, when they're in this misery, they think back on the days when they were walking with the Lord, when they were walking in obedience to the Lord, and the Lord was blessing them. Jerusalem hath grievously sinned. Therefore she is removed. All that honored her despise her, because they have seen her nakedness. Yea, she sigheth and turneth backward. Her filthiness is in her skirts. She remembereth not her last end. Therefore she came down wonderfully. She had no comforter. O Lord, behold my affliction, for the enemy hath magnified himself. The adversary hath spread out his hand upon all her pleasant things. For she hath seen that the heathen entered into her sanctuaries, whom thou didst command that they should not enter in to thy congregation. And her people sigh. They seek bread. They have given their pleasant things for meat to relieve the soul. See, O Lord, and consider, for I am become vile. Oh, what suffering, what torment, because of their sin, because of their iniquity, because of their rebellion. against the Lord. Consider the suffering that sin brings. Consider the suffering that sin brings, and acknowledge the righteousness of God. There was a time when Jerusalem was filled with the finest of wheat. She prospered. She was blessed of the Lord. Turn with me to Psalms 147. Psalms 147 and in verse 14. He maketh peace in thy borders, and filleth thee with the finest of the wheat. He didn't just give her the finest of the wheat, but He filled her. And continually filled her with the finest of the wheat. She was blessed of the Lord. And all the nations knew she was blessed, that she prospered greatly. Oh, think about it in the days of Solomon, when Solomon prospered so. Prospered so in wisdom, but not only in wisdom, but because he had asked wisdom that he might govern the people of the Lord gave him riches as well. And he had kings and queens from all over the earth coming in to behold the wisdom that God had given him. And they saw his great wealth, which was all a testimony of as long as Solomon was walking in the ways of the Lord. But what happened when his many wives turned his heart away from God? God brought him down and rent the kingdom in two. Deuteronomy chapter 8. Verses 7 and 8. The Lord said this would be. Deuteronomy 8 verse 7. For the Lord thy God bringeth thee into a good land, a land of brooks of water, of fountains and depths that spring out of valleys and hills, a land of wheat and barley and vines and fig trees and pomegranates, a land of oil, olive, and honey. Oh, he took them in and he gave them a prosperous land. It said in the book of Exodus, they take them to a land flowing with milk and honey. And he filled her with the finest of wheat. But now what is Ezekiel portraying? Now the coarsest of grain, the base of grain, and not in abundance either. You think he had to go down and use that base grain to bake the bread, and it wasn't in abundance either because he had to weigh it. And only so much each day. Look back at Psalms chapter 81. In verse 16, he says, he should have fed them also with the finest of the wheat. He should have fed them also with the finest of the wheat. And with honey out of the rock should I have satisfied thee. I mean, he's saying, this I would have given to you. I did. And you forgot me. You rebelled against me. I would have continued it. As long as your heart would have stayed close to me. You see, that plenty which they had, that plenty which they enjoyed, they abused it. They had taken their luxury. They had taken it to excess. They forgot God. And God did what He said He'd do if they forgot Him. He punished them. Because you read on down in that 8th chapter, it says, verse 11 of the 8th chapter of Deuteronomy, it said, beware that thou forget not the Lord thy God, in not keeping His commandments, and His judgments, and His statutes, which I command thee this day, lest when thou hast eaten and art full, and hast built goodly houses, and dwelt therein. In other words, when I have blessed you, and you've enjoyed all this blessing of mine, and you've eaten, and you're full on the blessings that I've blessed you with, because of your obedience, and when thy herds and thy flocks multiply, and thy silver and thy gold is multiplied, and all that thou hast is multiplied. Not only food was abundant, but He multiplied their herds, and He multiplied their gold and their silver. Are you thinking of the United States of America yet? And the parallel? Then thy heart be lifted up, and thou forget the Lord thy God. Which brought thee forth out of the land of Egypt from the house of bondage, who led thee through the great and terrible wilderness, wherein were fiery serpents and scorpions, and drought where there was no water, who brought thee forth water out of the rock of flint, who fed thee in the wilderness with manna, which thy fathers knew not, that He might humble thee, and that He might prove thee, to do thee good at the latter end. And thou say in thine heart, my power and the might of mine hand hath gotten me this wealth. Do you know that it's very few so-called Christians that profess the name of Christ when you're out at a restaurant? Or you're in their home, that bow their heads and thank the Lord for the bounty which they're about to partake of? Amen. What are they saying? My hand hath gotten this. They're not thankful to God. And let me tell you, you can tell when you go into somebody's house whether they're in the habit of bowing their head and praying before they eat the food, or whether they're just doing it because you're there. They're not fooling anybody. But thou shalt remember the Lord thy God, for it is He that giveth thee power to get wealth, that He may establish His covenant which He sware unto thy fathers, as it is this day. And it shall be, if thou do at all forget the Lord thy God, and walk after other gods, and serve them, and worship them, I testify against you this day, that ye shall surely perish. What's the portrait that Ezekiel is portraying in the 4th chapter and continues on in the 5th chapter to portray? It's one of perishing. It's one of the condemnation of God coming upon them. As the nations which the Lord destroyeth before your face, so shall ye perish, because ye would not be obedient unto the voice of the Lord your God. Ye would not be obedient unto the voice of the Lord your God. Fullness of bread was one of Jerusalem's mercies, but it was her downfall also. In the 16th chapter of the book of Ezekiel, in verse 49, he says, and thy sister, Sodom. He's speaking to Israel. He's speaking to Jerusalem. Your sister Sodom, which was better than Jerusalem, and said her great sin was that she was filled with pride, and with proudness of heart she did eat her bread and drink her water. And that was her downfall. And the Lord says this concerning Israel here in the Deuteronomy chapter 8. He said, when I bless you, and you've eaten to the full, beware. He says that to us tonight. Listen. The United States of America, no doubt about it, has been blessed of the Lord over the years. And I think because as a whole, we feared the Lord. Yeah, a lot of ungodly people. Many weren't Baptists. Yes, Baptists were persecuted in this country by religious folks, by probably even many of them saved folks. But they came together and sought the Lord in setting up this country and establishing its laws and establishing its constitution. And God used her over the years and blessed her. And she was, and still is, a big provider of food to the majority of the world. But how long? How long? Consider some reasons to bless God. Freedom of commerce, freedom of travel, between municipalities, not only between municipalities, but between states. Not walls up around each state with checkpoints for you to pass through. It may be coming to that. I don't know how far. I don't know what we're going to see before the Lord comes back. And you don't either. Freedom for buying and selling. Free enterprise. Freedom of exchange between individuals. Some of those are slowly eroding. Some of them are going at warp speed, being eroded away. Plenty. For years and years. There's been an abundance. Not only in the field, but in the marketplace. I remember working in the grocery store as a teenager. And yeah, you had some choices, but not a lot. And then, as time went on and we got married, and maybe 10 years into our marriage and so forth, I go to the grocery store and get groceries with the wife, and I'm looking at, my goodness, when did we get all these choices? I mean, you got pork and beans. You don't just have 2 or 3 choices. You got 10 choices of pork and beans, and all those different varieties of things. I mean, look at the grocery stores. Just full. Those who live in cities, they don't sow nor reap. A joke up in northwest Ohio was because northwest Ohio was a farming community, and probably it's the same joke among all the farmers, is that you're there and the city slicker, you know, the battle is raging about taking care of our farmers, you know, because they're supplying the crops and beef and pork and chicken and all that stuff that we eat. And this person writes in, what I care about the farmers, I get all my stuff at the grocery store. Well, and there are people that have thought that way. I've heard them say it. Where do they think it come from? You know? But they don't sow and they don't reap. And yet, they're fed from day to day with their necessary food. Yeah, they go out and they work a job and earn money so that they can go to the store and buy it. But it's there. It's in the marketplace. Deuteronomy verse 10. He said, when thou hast eaten and art full, then thou shalt bless the Lord thy God for the good land which he hath given thee. Yes, the United States of America, with all her faults, I still think it's the greatest place to live in the world. Not only did this picture a city that was all shut up and the supplies cut off and a famine in the land, but it pictured that those who were carried into captivity would be forced to eat their defiled bread among the Gentiles. A defiled people. Verse 13 of our text told us that. It said, and the Lord said, even thus shall the children of Israel eat their defiled bread among the Gentiles, whether I will drive them. They're going to eat their defiled bread, and it's going to be among the Gentiles. This was to portray that the Jews would eat bread prepared by the Gentiles, and it would be defiled bread, baked in their ovens. As well as eaten in their land. Matthew chapter 9 tells you what the Israelite thought of that. Jesus went in and sat down with publicans and sinners and ate. And those old self-righteous Pharisees got all over him about it. Why did they get all over him about it? Because it was not permitted for a Jew. The Gentiles were unclean. Their food was unclean. As is portrayed in the picture of Daniel chapter 1 and verse 8, when those Hebrew children were to eat of the king's dainties, eat of the king's meat, the king's portion that he had given unto them, that they might be the best, because he took the best of those Hebrew children and he wanted them fed the best food in all the land of Chaldea. And what Daniel said, he purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself with the king's portion. You see, it was defiled bread. It pictured to us, pictured to the Israelite, pictured to the city of Jerusalem, that another people was going to be their ruler and was going to rule over them. And you think of all the countries, all the kingdoms that the Lord has raised up over the history of this earth to accomplish His purpose. And He's tore them down also. I don't know when the Lord's coming. I know it's soon. How soon? I might die before it happens. But before I die, I might even see another people ruling over me in the land of the USA. America's forgotten God. Oh, they profess to know Him, but their works say otherwise. Shall we stand, be dismissed in a word of prayer?